From the East Texas Sports Network studios, powered by Texas Dairy Queen, a tradition of excellence, the ETSN podcast, where Clint Buckley and Mike Graham offer their, well, they just talk. But who really cares? It's what they do best. It's the lowdown on everything high school football in East Texas. And now, Clint Buckley and Mike Graham.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the final ETSN.fm podcast of the regular season. Final night's upon us. We got a lot of playoff spots around East Texas that have already been locked up. We've got several more that will be decided Friday night. And also, one of the area's best players is expected to make his season debut this week. I am Clint Buckley. I'm joined, as always, by Mike Graham. How's it going today?
Hey, doing good. It's kind of an interesting week. Some teams are playing throwaway games, and others are fighting for their playoff lives. So, an interesting mix, and I'm ready to get to this and then move on next week and see all the playoff matchups and get ready to go with that.
Yeah, well, before we get into all the playoff discussion and the final regular season night of the season, we got one man in particular that we need to talk about. You know, we've discussed this, off and on throughout the course of the season, the indefinite recovery time for Longview running back JaMychal Hasty, who's sat out the entire season with a back injury. Now we know he's back. Head coach John King has cleared the star running back and Baylor commit to return to action. He began practicing this week, and he's expected to suit out and play this week against Hallsville, and that's really good news for Longview.
Yeah, perfect timing. It reminds me of, I don't know if any other professional athlete has done this, but Peter Forsberg missed one whole season with an injury in hockey and then came in for the playoffs and I think won some postseason awards. It's exciting to have JaMychal Hasty back. He's a very explosive player. He's going to add something. I'm not sure how much he'll add immediately. He's got to get his feet wet a little bit and get back into that form where you can take a hit and things like that. But that's definitely something that Lufkin should be concerned about in next week's playoff game.
You think JaMychal Hasty's ever heard of Peter Forsberg? Probably not.
No. But he was a dang good hockey player.
Yeah, for sure. And JaMychal Hasty is a pretty good football player. So, we talk about the short term. What it means for Longview and in particular the game this week. Hallsville has to win, to really control their own destiny in the playoffs. They have to beat Longview. That was a tough enough task as it was. And now you throw JaMychal Hasty into the mix, who probably won't be at full strength. I mean, hasn't practiced this whole time. He's been sitting out, doctor's orders, but they finally gave him the go-ahead, like we just said. And it'll be interesting to see how much he plays.
Yeah.
Knowing who Longview has in the first round, Lufkin, knowing that they want to have all their bullets firing going into that week, so I don't expect them to leave Hasty in there for too long on Friday. That'll be interesting to watch. And I tell you what, we'll talk a little bit more about this next week. Longview and Lufkin and their bi-district game, but the winner of that game looks pretty good. I've done some research and some fact checking and looked at all the different playoff scenarios in Region 2 and Division 1 and 5A, and whoever wins this game has the chance to go a while in the playoffs. And, this sets up really nice for Longview to have JaMychal Hasty back, who, as we mentioned, missed the entire season, which also means he missed that season-opening loss at Lufkin. So a different dynamic that the Panthers would have to prepare for next week.
Yeah, kind of a psychological threat, too, because you just don't know what he can add to the team. I mean, he might have missed so much time that he won't look like junior JaMychal Hasty, but he might be so natural that he's better than junior JaMychal Hasty, and that's something that Hallsville and Lufkin and I guess any opponent after that is going to be very concerned about.
Playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs? You kidding me?
All right, now let's talk about the playoffs.
Playoffs?
Man, that Jim Mora, man, he will live forever.
You kidding me?
That soundbite, famous, years ago, back when he was the coach of the Colts. I believe that was Peyton Manning's rookie year.
Yeah.
That's something that'll always be with the American sports fan.
And only one of his good sound bites. He's got quite a few.
Oh yeah, he's got great. That's the one that stands out, and that's the one obviously that we chose because we're down to the final countdown in the high school football regular season. A lot of playoff berths on the line, and one in particular that we want to talk about today is Tyler Lee's chances of making the playoffs out of District 11 6A. They're still alive. They don't control their own destiny. What needs to happen for Lee to make it is first things first, they need to take care of business Thursday night at Garland Naaman Forest. They need to win that one. A loss wipes them out of playoff contention altogether. And then it comes down to the next night, Friday night's game between Rowlett and Saxe. In order for Lee to make it, they not only need to beat Naaman Forest Thursday, but they need to have Rowlett beat Saxe, which would create a two-way tie for the fourth and final playoff spot between Lee and Saxe. Then, of course, Lee would get the tiebreaker because of their head-to-head win all the way back in September in the district opener. So it's clear Lee has its goal out in front of it. It knows what it needs to do, and this is a program that's hungry for the playoffs. I mean, they've missed it for 3 straight years. This is year number 3 for Daryl Piskey, and it's something that they've been building towards ever since he got there. Because when he took over the program, it was in really bad shape. Mm-hmm. We've seen over the last 2 to 3 years steady progression. This was the logical next step coming into the year, was making the playoffs, and they're right on the doorstep. And just a side note, if by chance Lee misses out on the playoffs, and I found this crazy, it'd be the first time an entire class of students at Tyler Lee will have not experienced the playoffs, and the last time was 1986. So that's another thing that Lee will take to the field with them Thursday. They don't want to be that first senior group to leave that program without experiencing the playoffs.
Yeah, some good seniors on that team too.
Exactly, and I don't. Brandon Derman, I mean, he's been talking about this ever since the summer. Having a chance to talk to him just throughout the course of the summer and the different camps he was going to, and then went out to their first practice at the beginning of the season, and that was the only thing he wanted to talk about was everything we're doing from this point on is to make the playoffs. They have a chance. They're in position. They've done what they needed to do to have a chance to get there. Naaman Forest, a lot of people might think this is a mismatch in Lee's favor just based on the struggles that Naaman Forest has had this year. They've won just one game, and it came against a winless opponent, North Garland. But one thing to keep in mind about this game is who Naaman Forest has in their backfield, and that's running back Michael Nelson. He doesn't have that name recognition that Chris Warren from Rockwall has, or that Markeith Miller from Garland has. Both of those two guys have been lighting up defenses in that district, and the same goes for Michael Nelson. He's third in the district in rushing, and he's not too far behind either Warren or Miller. So that's going to be a big test for Lee's defense. And as we've seen of late, they have really had a hard time slowing teams on the ground. You saw that firsthand a few weeks ago against Garland.
Yeah, Markeith Miller had success any way he went. He could go up the middle, hit off the tackles, and he was going for yardage. And that's something that I'm assuming that Chris Warren was able to do since he got 459 yards last week in the Rockwall game. Tyler Lee will have to shore up its defense and at least box Michael Nelson in. Figure he's going to get some yardage, but you can limit yards after contact, and that's the big thing, I think, for the Red Raiders in this game.
Yeah, and I don't think it's fair to the offense. I mean, because Lee's been put in the defense has been putting the offense in that position where they have to play catch-up the entire game, kind of have to match score for score. And in particular, in the Garland game, a 62-54 loss, and then last week's game against Rockwall, 61-54. They were in both games, had a chance to win both, but it sure would be a whole lot easier on Lee, and the pressure would be taken off if their defense was able to get a few stops Thursday night against Naaman Forest.
You're right, Lee, very explosive offense with Zach Hall, who's nearing 3,000 total yards between his passing and running abilities. They've got 2 good running backs, and then Ishjuan Barker at receiver is a receiver that I think is going to be really special. If not in the postseason this year, then next season, his senior year.
Good junior class for Lee. Yeah. I mean, you talk about Zach Hall, the quarterback, their 2 running backs, Tavon Wesley and Devontae Craver, both juniors. You just mentioned Ishjuan Barker, he's a junior. And then you got Jordan Devers, their other receiver, he's also a junior. So they're going to have players back. This would be a nice way to kind of go into the offseason is to get a taste of the playoffs with what will be a very senior-laden group coming into the 2015 season. One more quick note about this game. We talked about Lee's explosiveness. I think they need a fast start on offense. They've been playing from behind a lot, especially in district, and with everything that's riding on this game, you don't want to be playing from behind in a game that you have to have, because that just adds more pressure, and pressure sometimes leads to more mistakes.
Yeah, not to mention if you can build a multi-possession lead they're going to have to move away from Michael Nelson and start throwing the ball to try to catch up.
Exactly, and that's not their forte. Their quarterback, Juwan Sadler, I believe, has thrown only 3 touchdown passes this year to 8 interceptions. If they can contain Nelson enough to where Naaman Forrest feels like they have to put it in the air, that's going to be a big win for the lead defense. All right, on to District 15 5A, and this is a fairly straightforward scenario. It is a little more complex than the Lee's playoff scenario in 11-6A, but the 3 teams that are still alive for the final 2 playoff spots in that district are Marshall, Sulphur Springs, and Hallsville. Longview and Texas High, they've already clinched playoff spots. They're already their first round matchups have already been set in Division 1. This is for the 2 playoff spots in Division 2. And we have 3 teams that are right there. We got Sulphur Springs and Hallsville, who are each 4-2 in district, and we have Marshall that's 1 game behind at 3-3. Marshall gets Sulphur Springs Friday night, and then Hallsville plays Longview, which we mentioned at the top. Simply put, Sulphur Springs and Hallsville control their destinies. If each of them win, they're in the playoffs, and Marshall is left out. Now, we talked about how Longview is favored in the Hallsville game, so we're just going to assume that Longview takes care of business, finishes off the district undefeated, and beats Hallsville. That happens, Hallsville's 4-3. Then it comes down to the outcome between Marshall and Sulphur Springs. If Marshall were to win, that would create a 3-way tie for the final 2 playoff spots. They'd all 3 be 4-3, and they would come down to point differential. And the way it shakes out is if there is a 3-way tie, which would mean Hallsville loses to Longview and Marshall beats Sulphur Springs, Marshall is in, just based on point differential. They're already in. And then it comes down to Sulphur Springs and Hallsville. And while Sulphur Springs does have a head-to-head win over Hallsville, that's not what determines it. What determines it would be the margin of victory between Marshall and Sulphur Springs. Like I said, because it's all based on point differential. So if there is a 3-way tie, Sulphur Springs is in if their loss to Marshall comes by 12 points or less. If Marshall beats Sulphur Springs by more than 12 points, then Hallsville and Marshall are in. So it could get a little crazy, and that's probably the scenario we're going to see. We're going to see Longview beating Hallsville, and if Marshall beats Sulphur Springs, and I think that game's kind of a toss-up. We'll talk a little bit more about it here in a second. But if that happens, then it all comes down to the margin of victory in the Marshall-Sulphur Springs game.
Here's my question. In the Longview game, the Lobos don't have a lot to gain. They can only lose with injuries. When do they pull their players? And will they be willing to give up?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they only pull their players when they know that the outcome of the game is at hand. John King has only lost 3 district games in his time at Longview, and a lot of those seasons, they have clinched district, well in advance of their final regular season game, and that still hasn't stopped them from winning. So I don't think we're going to see a scenario where, if it's a 1 or 2 score game, in the fourth quarter, which it may or may not be. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case just based on the 2 teams. But if it is the case, I don't see King pulling his starters. Just for the sake of staying healthy. I think it's an ethics thing, really, if you look at it, because that would be doing a big disservice to Marshall. And I know they're big rivals, but at the same time, some would say that's maybe going a little too far, because you're not being fair to Marshall, and then there are others who will say, well, life's not fair. Yeah. We're looking out for number 1, so. No, but to answer your question, I don't think Longview pulls their starters if it's a close game.
It's a tough spot for them to be in.
Yeah, so we just went through all the playoff scenarios, and then the big prize that whatever 2 teams come out of this, the big prize they get are Ennis and Nacogdoches in the first round, waiting on them, and they'll both Marshall, Sulphur Springs, or Hallsville, whichever 2 make it, will be considered underdogs going into those 2 games. So that's what we're looking at for Marshall and Sulphur Springs.
And now it's the ETSN Dairy Queen Game of the Week.
Game of the Week is Marshall and Sulphur Springs because of so much riding on it. I mean, you have to assume Longview is going to beat Hallsville, and then then the last the last two playoff spots are all come down to that game. And I think the key matchup in this game, and there are several key matchups because I think these two teams are evenly matched, but Marshall's offensive line against Sulphur Springs' defensive line. I was working on the preview this week, and I noticed that Sulphur Springs gets after the quarterback. They've combined for 23 sacks on the season, and Marshall's offensive line is considered a strength of theirs because they have Chet Munden, the tackle who's committed to North Texas. They have two other good linemen in C.J. Powell and Tyler Hodges, and they have dynamic players at the skill positions. You talk about Cam Holler, you talk about John Love, DeAndre Osborne, Chavis Mills has come on this season. And they have a really deep receiving core, too, aside from Love. Jaquavian Dabbs, Deontay Jordan, Terrell Patton. I mean, they are explosive. They have explosive potential on offense. But as we've seen in the past, if you can't protect your quarterback, you could be in for a long night. And that's one thing that Sulphur Springs defense does really well is get after the quarterback. Now, Marshall, another thing to look at in this game is Marshall's coming off a good offensive performance. They're on the heels of a 56-6 win over Mount Pleasant. And even though Mount Pleasant's winless, they're really down this year, Marshall still has that feeling of a good performance coming into the game. I mean, they were in a rhythm last week. They put up 56 points, over 400 yards of offense. They were clicking on offense. Sulphur Springs, meanwhile, had to play Longview last week.
Stark contrast.
And they really were dominated. And, I was kind of surprised that Sulphur was only able to get 6 points.
Larry Pryor was rendered ineffective in that game.
Yeah, he threw 3 interceptions.
Yeah.
I mean, he did some good things on the ground, but through the air, I think he threw for 50-something yards.
Yeah, with Dylan Carpenter out there, I'd much rather take my chances with Larry Pryor on the ground, and Longview was able to successfully do that. And I think that Marshall will try to copy that. Maybe they won't be maybe they can't force him into that as much as Longview, but I think that that's the best approach to this game for them is to try to make Larry Pryor pull it and run.
Yeah, so that's one thing to look for because Sulphur Springs, even though they were playing Longview, and nobody expected Sulphur Springs to beat Longview, and not a lot of people expected it to be really close, but they were held to season low in yards and points. It just wasn't a very clean performance. That's a bad feeling to have going into a game this week with so much riding on it. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out, whether there's a hangover for Sulphur Springs at the outset or whether they come out on fire. It's definitely something to look out for. Should be a great game. The kickoff 7:30 Friday, Maverick Stadium in Marshall. Our contributor for ETSN, Anthony Hawthorne, will be there. You can follow him on Twitter. I believe his handle is @ANT_Hawthorne, and that's Hawthorne with the E at the end. So
Anthony's got some good games this year, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has really good games. In fact, I'm starting to wonder why I'm sending him to the games I'm sending him to when I should be there, but or you should be there. But this is a big game. Marshall and Sulphur Springs will have plenty of coverage throughout the night on Twitter and back on the website at ETSN.fm late Friday night or early Saturday morning. All right, our players of the week this week. Congratulations to our offensive player of the week, Kobe Caraway from Tenaha. And I'm not sure if I've ever seen a stat line quite like this. And not only what Caraway did, but what his team, Tenaha, accomplished. We start off with Caraway. 8 carries, 270 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That's over 33 yards a carry. And he scored on 5 of his 8 touches. So that was crazy. But to take that a step further, he had 8 carries. Tenaha only ran 10 plays the entire game. Just 10. They had 5 possessions. They scored on all 5. Caraway scored all 5 of them. Just 10 plays.
Yeah, talk about Overton dominating time of possession.
Yeah, I believe Overton had over 70 plays.
Yeah.
And lost. Tenaha won 34-24. I guess, all that time of possession and, controlling the clock. I guess that's overrated sometimes when you have a guy like Kobe Caraway. Congrats to him. Congrats to Tenaha, which I believe clinched the district title last week. No surprise, they'll be a favorite once the playoffs begin. But like I said, congratulations to Kobe Caraway, our offensive player of the week.
The defensive player is Brazos Heskew, a linebacker out of Canton, a junior, who in a game that Canton needed to win to remain competitive in entering the final week, he got 25 tackles, 5 for loss, and a 27-25 win. So they needed every single tackle that he provided against Emory Reigns to get to this point of the season. And Canton's a team that's pretty banged up, and they lost Chandler Island, and that really turned their season around from very promising to very grim. Here's a player that kind of willed the team to victory. Congratulations to Brazos.
Canton, that's an interesting story. I mean, they lost 5 in a row. Playoff hopes looked really dim. They, like you mentioned, they get a big win last week to kind of stay alive. They have another big one this week against Bullard that has playoff implications with it. It was a very much needed performance from Heskew. So once again, congratulations to our ETSN.fm and Dairy Queen offensive and defensive players of the week. Well, the wheels are turning up here to ETSN.fm. We've got lots going on. The volleyball playoffs have started. The girls' basketball season begins Monday. The boys are a week after that. We'll have a preview of the girls' basketball season in East Texas up on the website over the weekend. And as always, we have football previews highlighting the biggest games in the area this week. Some of them are already up on the website. Others will be added tomorrow. And then stat leaders. We're getting close to the end of the regular season, and we have some rushing titles at stake. So, pay attention to those. You can find those online. And then also, if you have any questions or comments for either one of us, you can always hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Clint Buckley, and Mike, you are at?
I'm at Mike ETSN.
Mike_ETSN,
yes.
Correct? Okay. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of us if you have any questions, comments, or complaints. We'll welcome it all. So that's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of the podcast. Be sure to check back next week when it's going to be all playoffs.
Playoffs?
Can't wait for that. So have a great weekend watching high school football, and stay warm. It's getting cold out there.
Here I go, here I go, here I go.